On My Honor, Chapter 10. "Joel, would you come here for a moment, please?" Joel's father called. Joel hesitated, wondering if he dared pretend that he hadn't heard, but then he turned slowly, and keeping his head down, moved in the direction of his father's voice. "The Zabranskis want to know where you saw Tony last," his father said, when he had arrived at his side. Joel had a sudden image of Tony laughing, the river water streaming from his dark hair. "On the road," he said. "On the road to Starved Rock." "But where on the road?" Mr. Zabransky asked. "How far had you boys gone before you turned back?" Mr. Zabransky was a big man with huge, rather hairy hands. He sounded impatient. "Oh," Joel said, scuffing the head off of a dandelion with the toe of his sneaker. "About as far as the bridge over the river, I guess." "The bridge over the river?" Miss Zabransky repeated in a small gasp. Mr. Zabransky leaned toward Joel. "But he was on his way to Starved Rock, right?" "Right," Joel mumbled, wishing again that he had remembered the first time to tell the story that he had originally planned. "Besides," Miss Zabransky said, "Tony can't swim. He'd know better than to go near the river." She seemed to be trying to reassure herself. "He can't swim?" Joel asked, squinting up at her. "Really?" She smiled, a crooked half-smile that Joel had seen a million times. "You must know that, Joel. You've gone to the pool with him, when he's willing to go." Joel shrugged. He tried to look away. "Well, he mostly played on the slide, or on the ropes, you know. But he never told me he couldn't swim." Mrs. Zabransky touched Joel's arm, and without thinking, he jerked away. His skin felt clammy, and he was sure the stink of the river rose from him like a vapor. "Maybe I shouldn't have told you," she said. "Maybe he wouldn't want you to know. He tried swimming lessons once, but he was always afraid of the water." "Tony? Afraid?" Joel pushed the thought away. "Is that all?" he asked, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "Yes," his father said. "I guess that's all." And as Joel walked away, trying to look casual, trying to remember how his feet used to move when he wasn't thinking about them, his father added to the Zabranskys, "Let's call the park ranger. If he doesn't know anything, then we should probably drive out there, take a look for ourselves." "I suppose I shouldn't worry," Miss Zabransky replied. "But you know what Tony's like. I guess I worry more about him than all the rest of the kids rolled up together." Joel stepped through the front door, into the cool darkness of the hall. Why hadn't Tony thought about his mother, about the way she worried, before he had decided to go for a swim? Joel stood in the shower, the water streaming over his skin. He had soaked 3 times, his hair, everything, and he rinsed and soaked again. The water was beginning to grow cool, so he would have to get out soon. His mother would be cross with him for using all the hot water. He turned off the shower, towel to dry. As he rubbed his skin, the smell rose in his nostrils again, the dead fish smell of the river. He considered getting back into the shower, but he didn't. It wouldn't help. He knew that. He pulled on his pajama bottoms and walked through the dark hall to his bedroom. Bobby was in the bed, probably already asleep. Lights were on downstairs, and the murmur of parents' voices floated up the stairwell. They were talking about Tony, of course. What else? He didn't turn on a light in his room. He simply headed for the dark shape of his bed and lay down on top of the spread, arranging his arms and legs gingerly, as if they pained him. After a while he heard light footsteps on the stairs, and then as his mother came into his room. She sat down next to him on the bed, so close that he knew that she had to be pretending not to be offended by the smell. "Joel," she said, "are you sure you've told us everything you know?" "About what?" he demanded, roughly, as if he didn't understand what she meant, wishing it were possible not to understand. "About Tony. About what you boys did today." For an instant he thought about telling her. It would have been such a relief, to let the words spill out, to let the choking tears come. But then he thought about having to tell the Zabranskys too, and the police, and about the twisted disappointment in his father's face. And he couldn't. He simply couldn't. He flopped over onto his stomach, muffling his response with a pillow. "I already told you. I got tired and I came home. I don't know what Tony did." "Did you boys have a fight?" she asked gently. Joel remembered being mad at Tony, but he couldn't remember, now, why he'd been mad. Especially he remembered saying, "You're the one who's scared." "No," he said. "We didn't have a fight." His mother continued to sit there as though she expected him to say more, and after a while Joel began to hold his tongue tightly between his teeth. It was the only way he knew to hang on to the words that threatened to come tumbling out of his mouth. "I know where Tony is," he wanted to say. "I can tell exactly where you can begin looking." Finally his mother leaned over and kissed the back of his head, then got up to go. After she had left the room, Joel unlocked his jaws, relishing the burning pain of his tongue. A few minutes later he heard his father's footsteps on the stairs, and he heard him stop just outside his room. He waited there for a long time, but Joel pretended to be asleep, lying perfectly still and concentrating on keeping his breathing steady and slow. Finally his father went away too. Joel buried his face in his pillow, pressing his nose and his mouth into the suffocating darkness. It would have been better if he and Tony had tied themselves together and climbed the bluffs. At least he wouldn't have been left behind.